No one expected that the woman the king would fall in love with would be a janitor. Not even me. That morning, I was scrubbing the marble floors outside the governor's ballroom, knees aching, bleach seeping into the cuts on my fingers, when I heard the security radios crackle. I looked up just in time to see a sleek black SUV pulling up to the grand front steps. I didn't know it then, but the man stepping out in a tailored navy suit and mirrored sunglasses would soon turn my entire world inside out. I should have gone back to cleaning, but something about him made me freeze. Maybe it was the quiet confidence. Maybe it was how the others stiffened when he walked past. All I knew was that in my oversized work shirt and rubber gloves, I felt invisible. And yet, he glanced at me. Just once. No smirk, no judgment. Just a nod, like I was someone worth noticing. Later that week, I found a white envelope slipped under the janitor's closet door. It wasn't a prank or a scam. It was an invitation. To serve on the private maintenance crew for a high-profile diplomatic visit, the one where the King of Westwind would be hosted at the state capitol. I laughed. Me, in the same room as foreign royalty? But when I showed up for the event, there he was again. Except this time, he wasn't in a suit, he wore a navy uniform trimmed in gold, and they called him Your Majesty. He remembered me. He remembered me. That's how it started. A glance, a nod, a question at the buffet table when no one was looking. One slow, impossible friendship that bloomed between a girl with no family and the most powerful man in the room. But when he brought me into his world, his people turned their knives inward. They didn't want a queen who smelled like ammonia and poverty. They said I'd ruin the crown. And for a while, I believed them. I wasn't always invisible. When I was little, I was the loud one. The barefoot girl with scraped knees and chipped teeth, chasing dragonflies through the weeds behind our trailer home in rural Indiana. My mom used to say I had a spark that I'd light up a room someday. She told me I was smart, told me to dream big, but dreams didn't put gas in the tank. Or keep the lights on. She worked nights at a nursing home, and on her worst days, she'd fall asleep in the same clothes she left in. One morning, I found her slumped on the couch, cold. Stroke. I was 13. They didn't find my father until months later, and by then, he didn't want the responsibility. I went into the system. Foster homes, group homes. I kept my head down, learned how to disappear. You learn quickly that people don't hurt what they can't see. By 18, I had aged out with a duffel bag and a GED. I got a job mopping floors at a regional hospital, and later, the state capitol building when they subcontracted. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. Kind of, until the budget cuts started coming down. That's how I ended up cleaning bathrooms during high-level political events, dressed in navy scrubs and a name tag that said Amber W. Custodial. They never used my name. They just called me the girl. If they noticed me at all, until the king. His real name was Julian. Not that anyone dared say it out loud. The press called him the modern monarch because he had abolished several royal traditions in his home country of Westwind. He wore sneakers with suits, took selfies with fans, banned arranged marriages. There were rumors he snuck out of events just to go walk in regular neighborhoods. And somehow, he liked me. At first, it was innocent. He'd find me during the after-event cleanup and offer me leftover champagne or ask what I thought of the fancy food. He'd really listen when I told him about floor polish or laundry mishaps. Then he started leaving little notes in napkin folds or behind picture frames. Things like, "What's your favorite smell? If you could be anywhere else right now, where would you go?" I'd write back. He always found my answers. Then he asked for my number. I hesitated, but I gave it. That same night, he called me just to hear my voice, said it helped him sleep. We started talking daily. Then every night, months passed. He told me about his country, about the weight of his position, about how he didn't want a puppet queen. He said he wanted someone real. The first time he flew me to Westwind, it was all secret. Private jet. Alias name on the manifest. His aides called me the guest. He greeted me at the tarmac himself. I was shaking. I had never even left the state before that. I remember stepping into the royal palace, all crystal chandeliers and velvet drapes, and feeling like I had wandered into the wrong life. Like I was wearing someone else's skin. He kissed me for the first time on a balcony overlooking the gardens. He said, "I don't want to hide anymore. I thought I was dreaming." but dreams have sharp edges when they shatter. It started with whispers. Then came the stairs. I was walking through the palace one afternoon, trying to find the library, when I passed a group of women in expensive heels and pearl earrings. They didn't lower their voices. "She's the janitor, right?" I heard she scrubbed toilets. "Is it a dare APR stunt? A commoner with no pedigree. What happens when she starts embarrassing him on camera?" They smiled at me, but their eyes never did. Julian tried to shield me, but he was one man against a kingdom. The press tore me apart. Mystery woman spotted again. Is this the king's maid in disguise? From mop to monarch, unfit and unworthy. One day, a tabloid published a photo of me from my hospital janitor days. Hair in a net, gloves on, dragging a trash bin down a corridor. The headline read, "America's Cinderella, or the Kingdom's Mistake." It went viral. I cried for hours in my guest suite. When Julian found me, I couldn't even look at him. I kept thinking I didn't ask for this. I didn't belong here. I never would. The worst part wasn't the press. It was her, Lady Eleanor Argrave. She was born into West Wind nobility. Her family owned half the vineyards in the region. Blonde, educated at Oxford, trained in etiquette, diplomacy, and how to smile like she meant it. She'd been unofficially linked to Julian for years. Everyone assumed they'd marry until I came along. She wasn't cruel at first. She was charming, too charming. She invited me to tea, took me shopping, gave me a necklace which I later learned had belonged to one of Julian's late relatives. It was a family heirloom. She gave it to me as a test. Then she accused me of stealing it. Security was called. They searched my suite. I was humiliated. Nothing was found, but the damage was done. The palace staff started avoiding eye contact. One of the cooks called me "your trashiness" when he thought I wasn't listening. Julian tried to defend me publicly. He made a speech calling me the woman I love and intend to honor. That was the first time he said the word marry. His advisors begged him to reconsider. They said I was a liability, that marrying me would cause political instability, that foreign allies might pull back, that Eleanor was a symbol of unity, and I was a threat. I asked him to let me go. I told him I'd go back to Indiana, that I wouldn't survive being hated by an entire nation. He held my hands, eyes rimmed with red, and said, "You don't belong in the gutter anymore, Amber. You never did." But he didn't believe him. I disappeared the next morning. I left the palace before sunrise, changed my number, cut off everything. I went back to America and took a job as a motel housekeeper under a different name. The tabloid said I ran, that I couldn't handle the pressure. Eleanor was back on the palace scene within 2 weeks. She smiled for the cameras again. Meanwhile, I worked double shifts, scrubbing mildew from shower tiles. I lived in a cheap studio where the walls leaked when it rained. I stopped answering calls, stopped checking news. I tried to bury every memory of that world, but I couldn't bury the shame. Not when every night I heard Eleanor's words on repeat in my head. "A queen doesn't smell like bleach." For months, I wondered if they were right. Maybe I was just a mistake in a palace full of pedigree. Maybe I had no business believing I could be loved like that. I thought I had disappeared for good. Back in Indiana, I went by Amy, not Amber. I worked at a roadside motel outside Terre Haute, the kind of place with vending machines that ate your change and cigarette burns in the sheets. I didn't talk about my past. Not to coworkers, not to guests, not even to myself. But the silence didn't help. I had nightmares almost every night, standing in the middle of the palace ballroom, dressed in my janitor uniform, while everyone else wore gowns and tuxedos. The crowd would laugh, and just before I woke up, I'd see Eleanor watching me from the edge of the room, smiling like she'd won. I started talking to a counselor at a free clinic. She was the one who told me what I already knew that I had been running, not from the palace, but from the feeling that I had never been good enough for anything more than scrubbing floors. I didn't miss the cameras, or the attention, or the weight of being watched. But he missed him. I missed the way Julian looked at me like I mattered. I missed the sound of his laugh at 1 a.m. when we'd talk about everything and nothing. I missed the part of me that believed I could be someone more than the help. I never told him where I went. I figured he'd move on, that he'd marry Eleanor, that he'd be better off. And for a while, it looked like he had. One day, while I was restocking the towel cart, I heard a guest in the lobby watching the news. I couldn't help but glance at the screen. There he was, Julian, standing beside Eleanor at some event in the capital of Westwin. They were shaking hands with diplomats, posing for photos. She was in a red gown, he wore a tux. They looked like royalty. I felt something in my chest crack, and then came the ache. The same one I felt the day I left the palace. A few weeks later, I got sick. I thought it was food poisoning at first. But when the dizziness didn't stop and my stomach turned at the smell of motel coffee, I took a test. Pregnant. I sat on the floor of my studio apartment, staring at the 2 pink lines, shaking like the ground had dropped out from beneath me. I didn't cry. Not at first. I just kept thinking he doesn't know. He has no idea. I wanted to tell him, but how do you reach out to a king, especially one you ghosted? For weeks, I did nothing. I went to work. I threw up behind the laundry machines. I slept in shifts. I started saving every spare dollar. And then, one evening in late spring, something happened that I'll never forget. I came home to find a man standing at my door. Middle-aged, sharp suit, accent I couldn't place. He introduced himself as Mr. Beckwith, said he was a private investigator from Westwin. I nearly slammed the door. He stopped me with 3 words. The king knows. I couldn't speak. My throat closed up. He handed me a sealed envelope. No postage, just my name. My real name, Amber. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Handwritten. I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped loving you. I don't care if you hate me. But please, please don't make me miss my child's first heartbeat. Jay. I collapsed onto my knees. Somehow, he knew. Maybe someone had recognized me. Maybe a motel guest took a picture. Maybe he just felt it. I didn't know. But I did know this: I couldn't raise a child in hiding. Not with shame clinging to my skin like a second layer. Mr. Beckwith said Julian wanted nothing from me. No statements, no appearances, no pressure. Just one thing. Let him be a father. I flew back to Westwin the next day. This time, there was no secret entrance. No disguise. No nightfall arrival. The jet landed in daylight. The tarmac was filled with press, security, and flashing cameras. I froze at the top of the stairs, heart pounding. And then I saw him, standing alone, in full royal uniform, eyes locked on mine. He didn't move until I did, and then he ran. Across the tarmac, in front of everyone. No security could stop him. He reached me and wrapped me in his arms, and for the first time in months, I breathed. He didn't say anything, just held me, and cried. After that, everything changed. Julian didn't care about the headlines anymore. He told the world the truth, that he loved a woman who cleaned floors. That she had left not because she was weak, but because she had been broken by the weight of their judgment. He said if his people couldn't accept me, then maybe he didn't want to be king anymore. The palace erupted. Eleanor was furious. She called a private press conference where she gave a sweet, calculated speech about duty and tradition. She implied I was manipulating him, that I had trapped him with a pregnancy, that she had stood by him during my absence. But her perfect mask cracked. A journalist leaked recordings of private conversations where Eleanor laughed about setting me up, calling me cheap American help, and bragging that she'd planted the necklace herself. The public turned. Suddenly, I wasn't the problem. She was. Support flooded in from women around the country, women who had started at the bottom, who had been judged by their jobs, who had been told they weren't enough. Julian didn't step down. He stood taller. And 1 month later, in the palace garden where he first kissed me, he went down on one knee. No crown. No cameras. Just us. I said yes. Not because he was a king. Not because of the baby. But because, for the first time in my life, I knew I wasn't less than. I was loved. Not in spite of where I came from, but because of who I chose to be every single day. I got up and kept going, even when I wanted to disappear. The day of our wedding, I didn't wear a tiara. I wore my mother's locket, the one I kept buried in a shoebox all those years. Because she was right. I did have a spark. I just had to believe in it myself. I didn't feel like a queen the morning of my wedding. I felt like a survivor. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see royalty. I saw the girl who used to hide in mop closets, the woman who once believed love only belonged to people born on the right side of the velvet rope. But as I stood there in my ivory dress, hands resting over my baby bump, something had shifted. Not just in me in the air, in the kingdom, in how the world saw me. Or maybe, more importantly, in how I saw myself. They didn't expect me to return. They never expected me to rise. But here I was, not as a fairy tale, not as a scandal, but as something quietly more powerful, a woman who knew who she was, and no longer asked permission to be it. Julian and I got married in a private chapel on the palace grounds. He wore a simple black suit, not a crown. I walked myself down the aisle, no pageantry, just intention. The staff, the ones who once looked through me now, looked at me with quiet respect. Some of them smiled. One of the kitchen aides who had once called me your trashiness left a single white rose at my dressing room door with a note. You taught me something. I'm sorry. It didn't erase everything, but it mattered. Eleanor was not invited. By then, she had officially stepped away from public life. Rumor had it she'd retreated to a private estate in the countryside. Her family's reputation had taken a hit not because of what she did to me, but because she used cruelty as strategy and got caught doing it. She was never punished by law, but in a place where image is everything, silence can be a sentence. Her name stopped appearing in the headlines. Her absence spoke louder than any scandal. As for me, well, it took time. A long time. Even after the wedding, I felt like I had to earn every moment I was allowed to stand next to Julian. I stayed quiet in public appearances, terrified I'd say something wrong. I studied etiquette manuals in secret. I tried to mimic the way noble women sat, walked, spoke. I kept waiting to be humiliated again, to mess up, to prove everyone right. But Julian saw it. He saw the fear under my surface. One night, curled up in our room, I admitted it. He didn't lecture me, didn't tell me to just believe in myself. He simply said, "You've never needed to perform to deserve love, not for me, not for anyone." And then he added, "Let's build something new, something no one's ever done before." So we did. Together, we created something that had never existed in Westwin, a public office for commoner outreach. I became the founder and director of the Crown Commons Initiative, a nonprofit arm of the Royal Office that provided support, job training, and legal resources for working-class citizens, immigrants, and underrepresented communities across the kingdom. They called me the People's Queen, not because I was perfect, but because I remembered what it was like to be unseen. I hired former janitors, former waitresses, women who had been laughed out of interviews, survivors of abuse, girls from group homes. I created mentorship programs that paired palace staff with underprivileged girls across the country. Some of those same girls would later write me letters that made me weep. One said, "I thought queens were only in movies, but now I know they can be real. And maybe, someday, I can be something too." Every letter reminded me why I didn't walk away again. Motherhood changed me too. Our daughter Grace was born on a rainy night in July, in the very same palace hospital wing where Julian had been born years earlier. She had his eyes, but her cry, strong, stubborn, echoing through the halls, was mine. The first time I held her, I didn't think about the cameras or the titles. I thought about my mom. I thought about that night when I found her on the couch, how I'd whispered goodbye and promised I'd be okay. I wasn't okay for a long time, but now, holding my daughter in my arms, I whispered something new. "We made it, Mama." The palace changed too. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly, the old walls of tradition started to crack. New voices were brought to the table. Modern reforms were introduced. Staff were given better pay, better protections. The council diversified. Even royal events started to include citizens from all walks of life, not just nobles in jewels. People started showing up, not to mock me, but to thank me. And when I spoke, they listened. Julian and I faced criticism, of course. Some said we had cheapened the crown, that we had turned legacy into publicity. But those voices grew quieter with each year, because what they didn't understand was that we didn't need their approval to make a difference. We just needed the courage to keep going. And that courage, I earned it on hands and knees with a mop. In the silence of exile, in the shame of judgment, and in the forgiveness I had to find within myself. Years later, at a press conference for the Crown Commons' 10th anniversary, I was asked by a young journalist, "Your Majesty, what would you say to the people who still think you never belonged?" I smiled, and I said, Belonging isn't something anyone can give you. It's something you build brick by standing in the truth of who you are, even when every voice around you says you're not enough. Especially then. I didn't need to prove anything after that. My life had already answered the question. And now, I still don't wear a crown every day. Most days, I wear jeans and a blouse. I take Grace to school, I oversee community meetings, I visit hospitals, shelters, trade schools. I still know how to polish a floor until it gleams. That part of me never left. But now, when people look at me, they don't see a mistake. They see a woman who was told she didn't belong and stayed anyway. They see someone who came from nothing, not as a sob story, but as evidence that love doesn't care about status. They see a queen who was once the most unwanted bride in the kingdom, and now they see a woman who turned rejection into purpose, who turned shame into service, who turned silence into a voice for others.